like to be introduced?
Your Majesty always works well. No, I'm just well, I refer to myself frequently as a mammal. This is common. In other words, even if I weren't a father or a grandfather, I'm still a mammal. And the fact that I'm a man and can't, never have, and never will breastfeed, that's totally irrelevant because it's common to our species of mammalian origin.
Excellent. Are you going by any titles?
No, I have a bachelor's in Bachelor of Arts and a Master in Public International Affairs. And as you well know, I've done some coursework at the master's level in public health.
Mm-hmm. At Tulane University.
At Tulane University.
Where we met,
exactly. And then I've spent 25 years working at the World Health Organization in international public health nutrition. And since I retired formally 15 years ago, I've continued to work in this area, writing a book, writing other articles, chapters, and books, and giving conferences in 10 countries, 54 conferences at last count.
Excellent, excellent. So why aren't we doing it?
Why aren't we doing it? It's a massive problem to try to pull apart, and it's different in every society, if you like, for every individual. We somehow believe that this is something of the past, that it's something animal-like, that it's a behavior which is not something that needs to be engaged in. Some people think that children are dominating their lives, and which of course is absolutely true. Any child will dominate a mother's life simply by virtue of the fact that we are born after 9 months of the average or full-term pregnancy, where the baby elephant takes 22 months and is ready to go. It walks immediately, so as do foals, as do horses of all sorts.
We take another 20 years.
We take another 20 years, and there we're getting into to the 2 decades of life. The whole concept of brain development, the synapses, which and the wiring of the brain, we keep hearing it's being pushed back. Well, we're mature at 12. No, we're mature at 14. No, actually, we're not mature until we're 16. Well, on the other hand, I have some evidence that it's 18 now, and now we're up to 20, 22, 25. The brain is still developing. We're very malleable creatures. And, well, if this is not fired by high-octane nutrition, something is not going to be right. I don't have to be either a scientist, a medical doctor, or least of all a neurologist, to state quite simply that we will never achieve our full genetic cognitive potential unless we're fed the milk which is suitable for us as a species. And it's not just the fact that it's breast milk, human milk from a mother, but it's human milk which is produced by a mother who's living in a particular environment and which contains the antibodies which her body is producing to go into the body of the infant. And the whole question of the microbiome and the fact that the infant's gut is colonized not by something from a factory, not by a cow's milk-based substitute, but is colonized by the mother's own bacteria.
Right. But there are so many costs that women have to breastfeed, right? I mean...
Well, costs, depending on how you look at the word cost, of course, it's a very curious thing that I see it a little bit less than I used to see it, but 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it was very common to say, and what's more, breast milk is free.
Right.
Well, I have a problem with that on several grounds. First of all, and I've said this in public on numerous occasions, if you genuinely believe, hang on, if you genuinely believe that a woman's time is worthless, I'm being very crude here, I'm being very direct. If you genuinely believe that a woman's time is worthless, well, yeah, I guess the time that she takes to feed and nurture her infant at the breast, well, then I guess it's free.
Right. That's ridiculous, right?
But that's ridiculous. That's absurd. There's the other question that it doesn't take a great deal of additional food or expenditure for food to feed a mother, who in turn prepares a terrific meal for her child. It doesn't take very much at all. But those 500 calories have to come from somewhere.
Right. That's almost a third of
our intake.
What people usually are.
Well, I mean, I think the
1,500 to 1,800 calories.
The recommended, I'm not sure if it's recommended or not, or it's just the observational diet of the typical, the average female is, I think, 1,500 to 1,800, and the average male is somewhere between 1,800 and 2,200. But of course, if you're doing heavy labor, if you're a lumberjack out there swinging an axe all day long, you might take in more.
The women do need to eat more.
But women need to eat more, and this more has to come from somewhere, and that has a cost. But then there's something that economists refer to as the opportunity cost.
Third cost.
The third cost, and it's to use a silly example, it's like, well, where are we going to go for vacation, dear, this year? Do we go to the mountains or do we go to the seashore? Well, one of the opportunity costs of making a choice, either or, is that you can't do both, generally speaking, unless you're terribly well off, and then you can do both. But that's not the point. So the opportunity cost, you're sacrificing the mountains for the seashore, or the seashore for the mountains. But let's get away from the absurd, or let's get away from the non-value, and let's talk about a mother who is in a bind because she might be the sole breadwinner, or her additional income, because most women in, for example, the United States, North America, many women in Switzerland, where I live, are working outside the home. And it's not just because it's fun or just because it makes them feel better. No, it's absolutely economically essential. Now, if they have to choose between staying at home or being more readily available to their infants and bringing home the bacon, well, very often they quite literally cannot afford to breastfeed. And this is where appropriate, not just maternity leave, that's one aspect of it, but it's societal contribution to making this possible. Not in the interest of the individual mother or the individual baby, but in the interest of the entire society.
Right.
Because it's of importance for us all. In other words, whether we as individuals have children of our own, finally, is not the relevant consideration. What kind of a society do we want to live in?
Right. And you were saying that considering that the United States doesn't have maternity leave, that the breastfeeding rate is actually fairly high.
The lowest figure that I have ever seen for ever breastfed rate in the United States was probably 1948 to 1952, about 22%. And then it went up gradually. In 1956, when La Leche League International, or La Leche League at the time as it was referred to, was founded in 1956 in Oak Park, Illinois, I think the rate was something like 26 or 28%. Today, it's my understanding, I haven't seen the data for 2018, but I believe that the data show that the ever breastfed rate, that is, women who are in the hospital, in the clinic, in the first days and weeks of their baby's lives, are at least giving their colostrum and their early milk to their babies, is upwards of 84, 85, 86% across the country. Some ethnic groups, some populations, some parts of the country, geographically and otherwise, might be lower or even higher. But that, on average, 86%. I think that's totally phenomenal. The United States is the only country of which I am aware that does not have maternity leave. This, in a country like Switzerland and throughout most of Europe, is just completely unheard of.
Right. Right.
Completely unheard of. And in Scandinavia, it's very liberal. And it's not the liberal leave policies that make breastfeeding high. It's the desire to have a balance in life and work, including breastfeeding, that make the policy relevant.
Cool. Okay. Formula. That is a charged word, isn't it?
Well, infant formula is very charged in the sense that it's we're taking something which was an emergency nutrition intervention, and we're turning it into routine food.
Right.
And this is, I mean, it's a little silly. It's like giving everybody access to shots for diabetes, and giving everyone access to an additional oxygen tank for the back to be carried on the back, or a belly pack, and a mask for people who have no respiratory difficulties. Perfectly absurd. But that, in effect, is what's happened. So you've taken something out of the medicine cabinet, out of the first aid kit, and you put it in the kitchen pantry. And you've just made it another item of food.
Why?
Along with the peanut butter, along with the whatever it is you're eating.
You said who was the in the United States the purchaser of the most?
The largest purchaser in the world.
In the world.
In the world, largest single purchaser in the world of infant formula is the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA. And they're doing this to provide infant formula through the WIC program, Women's, Infants, and Children's Supplemental Feeding Program. And you could suggest that this is a very beneficial thing, all of the surplus commodities, but in fact, it's also getting the surplus commodities off the market, and it's serving to as a support for the Green Front for farmers.
It's basically in the agricultural bill to buy milk from the farmers.
Buy milk from the farmers and transform it into plastic cheese, processed cheese, as opposed to the kind that I'm used to eating in Switzerland, and of course into infant formula. So the largest, I think it's 52%, something like that. I've heard the figure.
Wow.
It's well over half of the infant formula which is consumed in the United States. And the biting irony of this is that the Women's Infants, the WIC program, is for women below a certain income, and they, if anything, their children need breast milk for their cognitive development. If brains are important, can we agree that brains are important? I think we can all agree that brains are important, and that includes the brains of families who have limited income.
Absolutely.
By the same token, I should come back in and say, WIC has had, over the last 25 years, they've had a very strong pro-breastfeeding component. So they're not just handing out free infant formula.
Well, that's good.
That's very good.
That's very good. When a woman starts on the formula, then it's difficult to continue lactating after that?
You know, there's something called relactation for mothers who may have lactated at some point, but they're suddenly for whatever reason they've ceased lactating. They can go back in if there's enough stimulation. Even women who have never lactated before can go into lactation. Grandmothers have been known to relactate in emergency situations.
Wow!
But the point being that the normal process, if you stop. If you have no demand, that is, no child at the breast, no milk will be produced, and the breast will invert and revert to its pre-pregnancy state.
Right.
And
which is why starting on formula.
Which is why starting on formula is very dangerous.
Yeah.
And plus you're giving, in most cases, cow's milk-based formula, and you're inoculating the child again with a cow's milk protein, which can be can also lead to allergies. Particularly in early childhood.
Right.
So that can be dangerous. And then you're giving a child.
That's what happened to me.
Well, it could very well be the case. Could very well be the case. And that your mother, your family, for the best of all possible motives, gave you something which perhaps they shouldn't have, and that we know better to do.
Right.
And also something which is very, how should I say, it's not secret information, but very few people actually know that infant formula is produced in such a way that it is not a sterile product. There is no way in the production line for it to be a sterile product. Despite the fact when you open up a can, it looks so snowy white. It certainly, yes, but the danger, the potential danger, is there because of bacteria which are not eliminated in the production process.
Right.
And this has an impact.
Of course.
In addition to the fact that the child in question is not receiving the mother's own antibodies, and that the child's intestines are not being
populated
with
good bugs.
Exactly, the good bugs, exactly, the microbiome.
Instead, it's getting bad bugs.
Yeah. And if you consider something that has been learned only in the last 10 to 15 years, something called the oligosaccharides, the sugars in human milk. And so far we're up to about 210, 220, which have been identified.
Oh, wow.
And it continues. And the interesting thing about these oligosaccharides is that they have absolutely nothing to do with human nutrition directly.
Oh.
They are not there to nourish the infant.
What are they there for?
They are there, I'm glad you asked that question. They are there to nourish the bacteria in the developing gut and to keep them at bay, and not to what is the expression? I'm looking for the scientific, not to permeate the gut, not to lead.
Right. The permeable gut.
Yeah, the
that's
permeable
leaky gut syndrome.
Yeah, exactly, and to prevent that. Yeah. And so that over 200 oligosaccharides have been identified, and they're not there to nourish the child. They're there to keep the bacteria at bay.
Right. Wow. The bad bugs.
Well, the good bugs too, because they want to nourish the good bugs and keep the bad ones at bay.
Right.
And which is why vaginal birth is so important, because you're kick-starting the whole system.
Right.
The child leaves the sterile environment, unlike the infant formula, leaves the sterile environment, comes into a polluted environment, the environment that we live in, and is uncolonized.
Right.
So it begins by passing through the birth canal, preferably, even though C-section rates are very high. They're very high in Switzerland, 34%.
Wow.
One of the highest in Europe.
Wow.
And the United States is not far behind. It's one of the highest in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not a good thing.
Right.
But between a vaginal delivery and human milk, which contains the antibodies produced by a mother living in that environment, so she's prepping her child for life in that environment.
And women who don't breastfeed, there are certain risks that they...
Well, women who do not... Well, first of all, women who don't become pregnant, women who do not breastfeed if they become pregnant, they are, from a if you like, statistical standpoint, they are more open to risk of developing any number of cancer of the ovaries, cancer of the breast cancer, and what other? Ovaries and uterine cancer, and then the other metabolic diseases, which they are more inclined to get.
Not to scare anyone into having babies. I know that you are a father of 2 adopted children.
Of course, of course. No, but this is a public health observation. I think it's very important to point that out. It's not the individual who might be at risk, but it's
the
on a population basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
Important to point that out.
Yeah. And there are resources available.
Resources available from all over the place, if you like. The best that I'm aware of, mother to mother, because mothers are the best placed to, not just to teach, there's part of teaching goes in there, but they're mothering other mothers.
Yeah.
And that's something which societies have been doing since there have been societies. And the one I'm referring to is, of course, began Leche League in 1956. And now they have organizations in more than 70 countries around the world.
Fantastic.
On most continents, apparently.
Great. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes below. And then, Jim, I hear that you have other resources to share with us.
Well, I'd be very happy to offer a short summary version. It's 10 pages, and excerpts from my book, which I wrote and published in 2006. And I'm willing to let any viewer have the entire book if required.
We'll put a link to both the excerpt and the entire book in the show notes. And thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you,
A
Dina.
real honor.
Thank you, Dina.
Thank you.